Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rusten. I'm one of the pastors at Coram Deo Church, and I'm here with my buddy, my pal, Pastor Jon. Still got my smoker laugh.
Smoker cough. It's Monday morning.
Yes, the more Jon makes me laugh, the more you'll hear my. I call it the. Isn't it in Simpsons? Isn't it the sisters? Is it Selma and Thelma?
I don't know.
Sorry, you don't.
I don't know, but I feel bad for that. I had that cough for like 3 months, and it's terrible.
Yeah, it's going around. All my kids have this little like rattle and cough in their bronchioles.
The worst is like mid-sermon, I would get the tickle in my throat, and like my voice would start to go, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I got to keep just power through it and try not to choke.
We need to buy some bags of cough drops just for.
I do. I have them loaded in the pulpit.
Yes.
There's like
there needs to be like
the secret spot
stock.
Yeah.
So we're back in Exodus.
Yes,
we are back. We're actually we're talking about Exodus chapter 10,
the penultimate.
The penultimate plagues before the ultimate plague, the plague that was originally forewarned in the very beginning altercation with Pharaoh is the Passover plague, the taking of the firstborn son.
Yep.
And so everything else leading up to it is a kind of warning of that, right? And warnings that are revealing a bunch of stuff along the way, and utterly decimating Egypt as it goes. Yeah. So the plagues in this chapter are the locusts and darkness. And man, the darkness one is interesting because it talks about it not just a physical darkness, but a darkness that is felt.
A darkness that is felt. Yeah.
Yes.
Have you ever? So I was like, okay, I don't want to read too much into it, but to me that seems like there's both a physical darkness in terms of a lack of light, but there's like the sense of like spiritual darkness. And I don't know if you've ever been to a place where you can feel spiritual darkness, but the first time I really remember that standing out was the first time I ever traveled to Basque Country. And it's the craziest thing because it's so beautiful and there's so many people and it's so wealthy, and it's not like when you think of like where there's darkness, I just tend to think of some like, third world country, far remoted thing where they're still, running around in witch costumes or something like that. And but I remember I could feel it. It was like, it almost like drove me to tears. So there's other times where it's like I've been in situations, even recently, where you can feel like sometimes I'll even have like a physical reaction, like my body gets really tense, but I tend to think something like that's going on. Have you ever experienced that, by the way?
I have. The few things that stand out to me where I've experienced that is I remember as a teenager, I lived in Louisiana. And I remember visiting New Orleans and the big Catholic church right in the downtown New Orleans. I forget what it's called. But there's a little square in the front called Jackson Square, and all around the church are palm readers and voodoo proprietors.
Isn't that crazy?
It's the weirdest thing. And I remember like you're walking by and you're seeing people like sit down and get their palm read, and you're seeing people sit down and talk to these like voodoo shaman people at these tables, just tables outside, like table by table by table by table.
Yep.
And I remember feeling like this just profound sense of darkness, but also just yuck. Like it felt like a and to me it's not even rational, what they're doing. It just seems like it's a stranglehold on people where they're like interested in this dark thing. So
I experienced the same thing in Mexico once, and it was outside a large Catholic church, and it was the same thing. It was palm readers, and I was like, oh, I wonder. That's not a good look.
What is the deal? Why are they outside the Catholic Church?
The Catholic Church, yeah.
Well, what in the world?
Well, when I went into the Catholic Church and I sat through a guy who was teaching, and Catholicism, I think people don't understand this. It's very syncretistic in its nature.
It is.
And when you go into a culture that is very pagan, the Catholic Church will actually take on some of that paganism.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you go to a Catholic church in the United States, you know, you're going to feel one way. And then you go into Mexico and you go to, it's like, oh my gosh, it's bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a real hatred for the Protestants in the Catholic Church in Mexico, for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember like we were working with a church down there and they were getting protested by the Catholics.
Wow.
Like generally peaceful protests, but protests
Yeah.
nonetheless.
Yeah. Interesting
Anyways,
stuff. Yeah,
darkness.
there is a lot of darkness there. So, the sermon, you focused a lot on something that gets a lot of real estate in this chapter, which is Pharaoh is, you know, Moses is trying to tell Pharaoh, like, let us go, otherwise the locusts are coming. And they're gonna locusts are the kind of bug that just cleans up, right? I think at the end of the hail, it talks about how there's still these things that were
There's
not
still
dead
something,
yet.
yeah.
There's
Yeah.
still some stuff that's not dead yet. But like if the locusts come in, they will devour absolutely everything.
They're like the rodents of the insect world, right? Like
Yes, and they leave no stone unturned, and they're generally like they can turn a lush place into a desert, right?
mhm.
And so the locust threat, Moses makes the threat, and there's this weird interaction where he, you know, Pharaoh's like kind of like willing to compromise. Yeah, you can go, but who are you going to take with you? And he says, well, our young and our old and our children, they're all we're all going. What do you mean?
Yeah.
And our animals? Yeah, we're all going.
Yeah, Pharaoh didn't ask that question because he didn't know.
Yeah.
That's a negotiating tactic.
It is. Yes, exactly. So, but then he, you know, there's this kind of emphasis on Pharaoh's side of like, well, how about just the men go, right?
Mhm.
Leave the children behind, and then ostensibly with the women behind too, because he says let the men go. And one of the things you emphasized was that this is a you know, maybe has a dual purpose meaning behind it. Right?
Yeah.
On one hand, you have, you know, this is collateral. This is an insurance policy. Like they're not going to go and stay.
They're not going to
gone.
leave
They're
the
gonna come
women and
back.
children behind. Yeah.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have like this is actually just kind of the way things work.
Mhm.
This is a tactic. The children and the women become used as pawns or, you know, pieces in this chess game against God's purposes.
Yep.
And specifically against the men. So I thought that you should unpack a little bit like what's going on there with the children. And we didn't talk as much about the women, but I think we should talk about that in this season.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things we've been repeating in all the sermons is Exodus isn't just about what happened; it's about what happens. So when you're reading it, you're getting the enemy's playbook, right? And it's sorry, I'm a football geek, and there's this thing going on in college football right now about stealing signs, and there's a coach that's been suspended. But you always want to steal signs. You always want to know what are the cues, what the enemy's going to do. So Exodus is the signs have been stolen. This is how the enemy works, and we get it. And you have to pay attention to it and not ignore the obvious. And the obvious in Exodus is that this whole thing is kicked off by God's people being fruitful and multiplying. It's the children and what the children represent about the future for Pharaoh that causes him to feel threatened because he's a coward. And so he goes after the kids, and and through the kids, he goes after the moms and the dads as well. So that's chapter 1. So you have to keep that in the background that, okay, there's a war on kids. They want to kill kids. They want to, specifically the boys, they want to destroy the boys. Which is, there's a book called I think it's called The War on Boys, or Boys Adrift. Sorry, Boys Adrift. Not even a Christian author. It's a really helpful book that is basically saying this. That there's a war on young boys. But anyways, so in Exodus 1, he's going after the kids, and then Exodus 10, right? We're at a different Pharaoh, right? There's a different king, but it's the same play. It's the same tactic in the attempt to separate the men from the women and the children, so that the men can go and worship, but the women and the children cannot. And that is, like you said, it's on the one hand, it's an insurance policy, but there's something really dark going on, because the family unit is the most basic fundamental building block of any culture or any society. If you want to take down a culture, you have to divide the family.
Yep.
Right. And so what's happening is a war on the family. It's trying to separate the women and the kids. And there's different reasons for both. Do you want me to go into those? The different reasons for both of those?
Yes.
Right. Well, so the reason you want to separate the kids from the parents is because the kids get their worldview from parents.
Yep.
Discipleship is an inescapable reality in the household.
Yep.
And so
and kids represent the future also.
They are the future, right?
There's a sense in which Pharaoh, when he sees the multiplying of the Israelites in his nation, what he actually saw was true, which was these people are the future of Egypt if I don't do something about that.
Yeah, he was right in that.
He was right in that, but from a pagan point of view that wants to maintain the paganness, right?
Yeah,
that's a threat, right?
That's a threat. That's right.
But from the Abrahamic promise of blessing, this would actually be for the good of Egypt.
That's right. Yep.
And so there's but the serpent hates God's blessing. The serpent hates this fruitful multiplying and the goodness that comes from it. And so he goes after the future. He goes after the kids.
Yeah. Now, in a very practical sense, adults tend to be more settled.
Yes.
In their convictions.
Yep.
Right. The concrete. I think the way I described it in previous sermons is the concrete has set. Right.
Yep.
And you're not going to win a whole lot of wars over worldview with adults.
That's right.
But kids are forming their worldviews, their minds, their hearts, their patterns, the rhythms. All that is being formed. The concrete has not set. And so if you want to change a culture, right? If you wanted to attack the future of Christianity, right? The future of God's people, you would go after the kids and attempt to undermine the worldview that is present in the home, right?
Yes.
Undermine the faith of the parents, because those ideas are not settled yet. They're still being formed. They're still, they're still working on it. And so, as much as the enemy can separate kids from parents, the better it is for the enemy, right? The more time, the more influence, the more propaganda, the more lies, the more all of it, the better it is. And it's not just that the kids in that setting are getting that, like, the enemy's agenda. It's also that they're not seeing faith in mom and dad. It's both, right? It's like they're getting something that's bad, but then they're also not getting something that's really good. Yeah. And that is just seeing faith, demonstrated, modeled in an ordinary home through ordinary obedience and faithfulness from mom and dad, just working through regular stuff. Like, that is so powerful.
There's an undermining of both the content of discipleship and the structure of discipleship.
Absolutely.
The content being, the worldview that you're getting, which is also overlapping with the structure, which is the covenantal realities of mom and dad, who are representatives of God's authority in the household, God's kindness, God's care. Yeah. A
truth, order,
exactly,
law. Yeah. All that. Yeah.
So undermine it, and you can undermine the future. That's the idea. That's the play, anyways.
Yes. Yeah, and so it's there's lots of when you look at, yesterday I was saying, where you want to see where the tip of the spear is for the LGBTQ.
Yes.
It's local schools.
Yep.
That's where it's at. And I made a joke about how Starbucks didn't have pride flags, during Pride Month, and the reason is first of all, they don't actually care about it, and second is they saw what happened to Bud Light. But today you could go into the high schools in our community and you would find Pride. It's not even Pride Month, and you would find Pride flags, and you'll see teachers wearing Pride T-shirts. We went to a sporting event, and there was a teacher that had a shirt on that had the name of the school, and then it said Pride underneath it, and it was all the colors of the rainbow. And it's like, yeah, this is an ideology that is championed and embraced. And I mentioned going to the school board meetings. You were at the last one with me, where the board members are bragging about their Pride pins, that they're wearing on their, jackets or whatever. It's like, you're not going to see that at the local stores. I can't think of a place I've been to in a long time that's had actually a Pride flag in it, but the schools have the Pride flag in it every day.
Yeah. I mean, unless it's Pride Month. I mean,
then there's multiple.
There's Paulsbo. Paulsbo just had a Pride flag on every door and every street. I think they had the flags on the street, but even that was like, somewhat coerced by the local government, right?
Yes.
So you had like it was like almost every 8 feet you had a Pride flag. Again, it was pretty tacky.
Yeah.
So
why does LGBTQ get a month and veterans get a day?
It's intriguing, isn't it? Because that's the work of revolutionaries to to overwhelm the discourse.
And the revolutions are predominantly youthful.
Yes. Yep.
There's a reason for that, and we just explained it. So
yep.
So going after the kids, because their minds are still being formed, convictions and ideas are still being made and formed. And so the enemy is going to try and separate kids from parents as much as they can, and then the irony to this is that the church is like, this is a great idea.
Let's you mean in terms of our practice? Let's separate kids from parents. Yeah.
And for our church, for a long time, we had kids classes till like up to 6th grade or something like that. And I remember back in the day when we were planting, like, whenever you look at a space or you think about a building or whatever, it's like you always had to have kids space because, you have to do that. And then, it wasn't that many. It was, I don't know, 7 years ago that we as elders came together and were like, we need to have kids in the service with us.
Yeah.
Because it's really good for the kids. It's not to say that kids discipleship or kids programming or that stuff's bad. It's just helpful. It is helpful. It's helpful in a supplemental way. And so it shouldn't intrude on the main course, which is God's families people gathered under the word, the sacraments, worshiping together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the things you talked about in, how this play happens is you made mention of the, how the ideology isn't just about people who are embracing an LGBTQ lifestyle.
Yes.
It's about people who embrace and affirm the LGBTQ ideology, and that oftentimes the way you'll see Christians, abandon biblical orthodoxy for this new ideology is through a kid in their family who, was going, and oftentimes this is a kid who was in the grips of those institutions that was creating a culture where that was being affirmed, going to public school. This is just kind of like, the life of the public school. It's also being affirmed by, the flags everywhere. And so, you have the seeds sown, as it were. Right. And then they come home and they come out to their parents, and the parents feel like I have to either choose my children or my faith, and I'm choosing my children.
Yes.
Right. And that there's a sense in which children are being used by the enemy as pawns.
100%.
Right. To get at the faith, to get at the men and the parents. And one of the things we didn't talk about in the sermon, or you didn't talk about in the sermon, is like there's a similar play sometimes that's being made on the husband-wife dynamic, or the women, right?
Yeah, the women.
And one of the things that you and I have noticed in a lot of these school board meetings is that the driving force behind a lot of this ideology is being driven by women.
Yes, and that was obvious at the school board meeting, the last one that we went to, and I first noticed it when all the online stuff blew up when I I shared a post from a local teacher that was a male who had
Yeah.
dressed up as a woman and had gone to school intentionally dressed as a woman, had conversations about gender fluidity and ideology with 5-year-old kids. So I posted that, and there was just like this wave of hate that came my way, and I was struck. I would say over 90% of the hate, whether it was posted to my to my Facebook wall, to thing where they're replying to posts that I had made, which I've since blocked and deleted, or the private messages that were being sent to me, I would say probably 95% of them were women.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, why is this thing? And that was something I hadn't noticed before, or at least not in that way. And I was like, why are women, the warriors for this cult?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a reason for it. And it has to do with the perversion of the way God has made women.
Mm-hmm.
So men and women are different. We're both
Yes.
image bearers of God. We're equal in that sense, but we're not equal in the way that we're wired. And that's true in terms of like physiology. Like our bodies are different, lung capacity, hearts are different, the ability to grow muscles, bone structure, like all that. It's objectively different. But God is also, as an expression of that, like it's in concert with that, God has given us different dispositions.
Yes.
And so a husband has a unique disposition as a protector, like warrior guy.
Strength.
Adam was told to protect the garden before Eve was ever around. But the mom, there's a strength. There's a unique strength that men have, both in terms of physical strength, but also in terms of the constitution.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. Absolutely.
And so the mom has a different strength. She is the giver and nurturer of life.
Yes.
And so mom has a gift. Like you think about when a kid falls down and scrapes their knee, like they want mom. When a kid isn't feeling good, they want mom. Why is that?
Oftentimes also because dad's like, you're okay. You're okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And often, sometimes dad's right about that.
Yeah. Sometimes
but, don't coddle your kids.
I think there's a really good in God's wisdom, in terms of the natural family. There's a really good, dynamic in there where you have nurturer and pusher, as it were, right?
Yes.
And
absolutely.
those two things work together to bring your kids into maturity, but also maturity that is coming from a place of challenge and nurture and love, right?
So women, and particularly mothers, have this nurturing gift where if they see someone that's hurt, right, they want to make that better, right? Come here, let me take care of you, let me help you. And that's a good gift, but that gift then can be perverted. It can be turned on the woman, right? It can turn against her. And the LGBTQ ideology is the perfect ploy to deceive women.
Yes.
Because the LGBTQ ideology completely restructures the conversation about sexuality and morality and perversion. It's no longer a right or wrong thing. All of these actions, anybody who identifies this is a victim.
Yeah.
Right? So if instead of is a pervert, they are a victim.
Yeah.
And that plays to the way God made women. And then so they go, oh, victim. My job is to what?
Nurture.
To nurture and to care and to embrace. And so because women don't have a biblical worldview to know the difference between, because I'm talking about non-Christian women who have basically rejected God's law. They don't have that law to go to see right and wrong as God has declared it. They hear what they have been told is a sexual minority that is now the part of the oppressed class,
Yeah.
right? And they're drawn to that, and they want to intervene and nurture and protect,
Yep. Yep.
right? And so, and I think that's why you have so many women that are getting caught up into the LGBTQ cult.
Yep.
And it is religious fervor and zeal like almost like no other.
Yeah. And it's one of the reasons why one of the things that I think Christians need to cultivate is one, we need to understand that if that's the way that this lie is being perpetuated, that we need to not be swayed by the tears of
Yeah.
those who are basically crying in order to get you to see that your job is to alleviate my tears by agreeing with me.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to give a quick shout out now that since you brought that up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. More beards, less tears. Our good friend Joy made those for us.
You know who you are. Thank you.
So, yeah, but
Yeah.
there's a real sense in which, you could look back in church history and see different battles that Christians had to face and different kinds of tactics. And in a lot of ways, they're the same plays, but they're being played out in different contexts. And I think one of the unique things about our time is that the primary way people are being led astray is through that perversion of nurture, that perversion of care, right?
Yep.
And like, we're at a point right now. It's like it feels like if you can get a Christian to feel bad or teary, or if you can plead with them with tears in your eyes, like you're basically got them. Like you can make them do anything that they want, right?
Yeah, you can justify anything if you're the victim. If you play the victim card, if you play the oppressed card, that I'm hurting, right?
Yeah.
Then that justifies everything, and it's almost like it is the trump card that you can't say, well, maybe one of the reasons you're hurting is because you're living in a way that is contrary to the way God made you.
Exactly.
Like if you keep banging your head against the wall and you go, oh, I'm hurting, like
maybe
the most loving thing you can do is say, maybe stop. Like maybe your head wasn't created for that. Maybe you should stop it, rather than to go, this person is a victim and you need to make sure that you let them keep smashing their head against the wall, because that is the most loving, affirming, right? It's like,
there's we just, with our youth group leaders, did a little training on Carl Truman's book, Strange New World.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically diagnoses the situation we're in, and he gives a good thought experiment where he says, okay, 60 plus years ago, if a man came into a doctor's office and said, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, right? Back then, the doctor would have said, hey, there's something wrong with your mind, right? There's something wrong with your thinking and your feelings. That's where the problem lies.
Yeah.
Now today, the person goes into the doctor's office and says, I'm a woman trapped into a man's body. The doctor's going to say, oh, there's something wrong with your body. Right.
Yeah.
And what has happened in between then and now is we've elevated the what he calls the individual, the expressive individualism of each person, where my true self is how I feel and in my mind. And thus anything that contradicts that becomes violence against a person's very core being and self. Right. And so I think that what you see happening with a lot of this, like, tears, right, is like people have bought into that. Right. Like, it's misplaced care, because it's caring for people in through that lens. Right. You think that you are this thing you are not, and anything that disagrees with that is thus violence to you. Thus, I am weeping for you. Versus the person, like, where would properly placed tears be? The person, it would be placed towards the person who rejects, who believes that they need to reject their body in order to become who they are. Whereas the Christian way of thinking about this, and the old classic way of thinking about natural law, natural revelation, is that God actually speaks through creation. He speaks through our bodies.
Right.
He says definitively who we are in how he makes us. And it actually, the person who is at war with that is actually at war with God and who God made them to be, and thus at war with himself. And I think it was, I shared a little documentary with you guys, but there's a line where, as a detransitioner is talking about how they, when they wanted to transition originally, they said that I wanted to kill myself before learning about transition, this idea of like transgenderism. And what I found in transgenderism was I could kill myself, but yet still live, right? Which is interesting because it's actually a false gospel, right? It's
That's
like a
right,
perversion of the
That's
gospel.
exactly where my mind went.
Right? I can kill myself, but what is it doing? It's leaning into the hatred of who they are as God made them, right?
Right.
It's actually leaning into hatred of self. And so, like, properly placed tears would be towards somebody who hates themselves and hate, and that being demonstrated in the hatred of their body God made them. And we should want to see them, brought into
made whole,
brought into a unity of mind and body, so that they understand that the way God made them is actually a gift to them, and that they don't need to see this, this division of themselves, right? Because God made us to be whole. So I think that properly placed tears is towards the person who feels that way, but not in order to help them embrace that hatred, but in order to see them rescued from it.
Yeah. We've taken the command to love your neighbor, and we've absolutely removed it from the biblical context. So loving your neighbor means that you don't covet their gender.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
And once you say love your neighbor as something other than that, you're worshiping a different God. You have a different law. Yep.
So that's, just an example of you have these different ways that there's plays being made, and then when strangely absent from a lot of these public discussions, though not completely absent, is men who stand up and who, like Moses, say no. Like Moses is like, no, we're not going without him.
That's right.
Sorry.
They got to come.
And I guess that means the locusts are coming, right?
Yeah.
So be it.
That's right.
There's on the flip side, there can be in the midst of these plays being made, an abdication on the part of men to just be like, okay, I guess we'll go with it, right?
Yeah, for the sake of peace.
For the sake of peace that is not peace.
Yeah.
So I mean, I feel like we're far removed now from like some of the stuff in Exodus 10, but I feel like that. But I feel like that this idea of attacking the household, this is what we're seeing today. This
is 100% what we are seeing today.
Yeah.
Look at legislation, look at education, look at the universities, look at the statistics about, kids who grow up in Christian homes who go away to a public university and what happens to their faith.
Yeah.
Like, those are not coincidences.
No, they're not. I think that we are probably living during a time where it needs to be made more and more, if it's not obvious to some Christians, it needs to kind of be explained better. But we're in a place right now where it doesn't really make sense to send your kids to a public school.
Yeah.
You're giving them, and I don't know if I don't even know honestly if that's there's still geographic holdouts where I would say that's not true. I'm in Washington. I'd say in Washington State, don't send your kids to public school.
Yeah, I have we both have friends in other states where you hear like good things about the and they I've heard stories of like conversations teachers have with parents that would be illegal in the state of Washington. And you're like, the whole world isn't Washington.
Yeah.
We are in Looney Town. But you still should be concerned.
And there is, I would say, even if that's true, there is the federal apparatus that has a lot of sway over every public school, and that if it's not currently, advocating for the worst of the worst, it's probably advocating for some of the foundational stuff that ends up just being the root of the
Yep.
worst of the worst, right?
Yeah.
Like evolution has been taught in schools for far longer than LGBTQ, but the two are linked.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
If something can turn into anything else,
Yes.
then something will
Exactly.
turn into anything else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but there is wisdom, I think, in rethink. I think there's wisdom in rethinking all the things you thought about, where you could what you're teaching your kids, or how you're going to educate your kids, and how you're going to encourage them to become educated further in adult life. This is one of the reasons we started a Christian school at Cormdale Church, at Cormdale Academy, is we think that there needs to be more Christian institutions that are unashamedly, driven by the truth that Christ is Lord.
Yeah.
But we also need to think, I think this is the interesting question to think about in the future, is like what higher education, right? Like so much higher education is just, it's like extreme boot camp for some of these ideologies.
That's right.
And so,
and you see that on the campuses right now in our country, where you have these celebrations of the the atrocities that Hamas committed against the Israeli people, and they're celebrating these on campuses. You're like, what are they teaching these kids? Well, by looking at the protests.
And the education isn't just what's coming out of the institutional mouths, right? It's not just the teachers. It's also the culture around those institutions that's formed by students. And so I'm looking at like degrees and how much people are paying off student debt, and I'm like, in most cases, unless you like want to become a doctor or a engineer or something like that, like you're definitely better served always like going to a Christian university of some sort, so long as they haven't imbibed some of this nonsense, which a lot of them have. Or honestly picking up trades, like learning to work with your hands again, right? Because I think that, I think that I think that in the coming years, I think we will see that becoming a more popular way to think about things.
Yeah, I agree with you for
or
sure.
new Christian institutions.
Yeah.
Well, we've run all over the mark today, and we're 7 minutes over, but
oh no,
lots of good rabbit trails.
Yeah. Can we say one thing as we end here?
Yeah.
Just an encouragement. We talked about like kids needing to see the faith of their parents.
Yes.
And I know that if you're a parent, sometimes that can feel like, where do I start? And it feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
And someone will say, here's a catechism, go through the catechism. And you're like, right. So I would just say, find ordinary, normal things to do in the household all the time. I heard from a pastor years and years ago, don't read your Bible in your study. Read it on the couch.
Yep.
And it was like, the reason is your kids will see you reading your Bible on the couch. It's like, so in the morning when I get up, I read my Bible on the couch. And my wife does the same thing. And it's like, we want our kids to wake up in the morning to see that. That's normal. That's forming a worldview and an expectation. Like, pray.
Yeah.
When you sit down to have a meal, pray. And pray for one another, even just in private. Just pray for your family. There's just simple things that you do. If you do that for 18 years, that it's like the savings account where you're putting a little bit in, right? But it will grow and it will pay off. And those are little things that you can do, like make church attendance a priority.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
You can do that. You don't have to be a theologian. You don't have to be an expert in the Westminster to do that. You could just take your kids, make sure you're going on a consistent basis. Find things that you can do sustainably, right? Because what you don't want to do is get the person who goes, I need to do a better job, leading my family. And they have this elaborate plan and they get 2 minutes into it on the first dinner meal and they realize that the kids are having nothing of it. And then they just throw their hands up and they're like, I'm done. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't want that. So I would say if you're trying to figure out how, like, what steps can you take the little steps that you can do all the time.
Yep.
You sit down for a meal, pray for your kids. If you went to, take your kids to church, take your family to church. We try to do one meal where we go is, do you have a comment or a question about the sermon, which is weird because I'm the one that's preaching the sermon most of the times.
Yeah.
But we want conversation about Sunday to be something that's normal.
Yeah.
Read your Bibles, let your kids see you reading their Bibles.
Yeah.
Those are just simple things you can do to start, moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that some of the most fruitful times are, we have a lot of like habits at my house, or the bedtime prayer time is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And also, at least one of the meals, there's definitely some sort of, family talk, Bible talk about something, even if it's small.
Yeah.
Right.
Small is great.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I remember, man, whenever I try to make a commitment to, hey, we're going to read through this, like we would do a couple catechism questions. Those meals and nights were the most chaotic.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like all hell broke loose. I'm like, what in the world? And it's like, it's just, it happens.
Yep. It does. Okay. Yep.
It's
totally.
Okay.
Start somewhere and do it.
Start somewhere. Start small.
And also know that like, I think also know that like part of why it might be hard is because Satan hates it.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yep. So, all right. Okay. Hey, until next time, everybody, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. See you guys.
See ya.